Nobody knows somebody wants you dead. Yeah, nobody knows somebody wants you dead. And the list it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows until it's everyone you've ever. Never celebrate till after the meal. Even when you think that you closed the deal. Cause when the bill comes in, they all look perplexed. You didn't sell it, you just bought the check. Now I know, now I know, now I know, now I know. Nobody knows somebody wants you dead. Yeah, nobody knows somebody wants you dead. And the list it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows until it's everyone you've ever known.
It's not often that we get to say this on the channel, but our coverage of world events actually begins with some good news for once. On the 1st of this month, 4 brave astronauts blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center on a 10-day journey to orbit the moon and go farther than mankind has ever ventured into the universe. The record-breaking journey stands as the farthest distance traveled by humanity. The first time a woman, person of color, and non-American have flown around the moon, the fastest humanity has ever moved in history upon re-entry to Earth, and the first time a total solar eclipse has been witnessed from the far side of the moon. As we previously covered on the channel, this mission was a part of the Artemis program, and not only aims to return humans to the moon, but also to build a permanent lunar base. There was plenty of drama leading up to this month's launch, with a snowstorm and hydrogen leak forcing a delay from February to March, and a subsequent helium leak causing another delay to April. The objective of the mission was to test critical systems and techniques to be used in future flights, while also verifying the performance of the Orion space capsule. Approximately 8 minutes after liftoff into the flight, the main engines were shut down and the Artemis crew got to work. Astronauts Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen started testing critical systems like the water dispenser, toilet, and firefighting systems. It should be noted that this flight was the first time a toilet has ever flown to the moon. The first time a toilet stopped working while on the way to the moon. And the first time NASA realized they could have a really good tie-in with the Mario Galaxy movie. After confirmation that most of the systems worked outside of the most expensive toilet in space, the crew increased their altitude above the Earth to practice flying the spacecraft manually for a few hours. Eventually, on day 2 of the mission, the engines were fired again to put the capsule on its trajectory to reach the moon. By day 6, the crew entered the moon's sphere of influence. At its closest, Artemis II came within 4,067 miles of the moon's surface, a little less than the distance between New York City and Rome. Finally, on day 7, Artemis II reached its peak distance from Earth, reaching a distance of 252,756 miles, and breaking the furthest distance from the Earth record set by Apollo 13 nearly 56 years ago. During their flyby, the crew witnessed a total solar eclipse, and saw 2 unnamed moon craters, which they named Integrity after their ship, and Carol after Commander Wiseman's wife who died of cancer in 2020. Around the 7th day, the crew left the moon's sphere of influence and began their journey back. The return flight was relatively uneventful, with 3 short course corrections and a minor helium leak being troubleshooted along the way. On the final day of the mission, the craft approached Earth and began plans for re-entry. Initially, the plan was for a so-called skip re-entry, where the craft enters the upper atmosphere for a time, bleeding off speed and improving accuracy, before dipping back into space briefly to make a final re-entry. However, on Artemis I's uncrewed flight test, the heat shield on the capsule showed higher than expected erosion. In the interest of safety, the skip re-entry was shelved in favor of a faster but rougher direct re-entry. A direct re-entry is harsher on the crew, but as one would expect, this approach is faster, which helps reduce the heat shield erosion time and improves safety. Future missions are planned to return to the skip re-entry profile with an updated heat shield. After flying 695,081 miles trials, the capsule splashed down off the coast of San Diego on April 10th at 5:07 p.m. local time. The mission drew significant international attention, with millions of people around the world tuning in to watch the launch of the rocket and recovery of the capsule along with its astronauts. For reference, less than 25% of the world's total population is old enough to have memories of the last time humans went to the moon. The entire mission was also live-streamed, allowing for unprecedented public access and viewing into the mission. So, what's next for the Artemis program? Viewers may recall in previous coverage that Artemis III was scheduled to be the first crewed moon landing, but that's not true anymore. In mid-February, NASA updated the Artemis and Permanent Moon programs, cancelling a planned Moon Space Gateway station in favor of a permanent base on the moon itself. NASA also announced that they would be inserting a new mission in after Artemis II, bumping the naming, but not the timelines for the rest of the program. The new Artemis III mission is planned as a crewed Earth orbit test of the planned lunar lander models, Blue Origin's Blue Moon and SpaceX's Human Landing System. Artemis III will now aim to perform critical docking practice with the actual landers and gain valuable experience in operating them. Artemis III is expected to launch in the middle of 2027, with the new Artemis IV due in early 2028 as the first crewed landing since Apollo 17 in 1972. Artemis V is set to follow later that year, launching in late 2028 and delivering more astronauts to the surface, as well as the first parts to assemble the lunar surface station. Artemis V is currently the last planned Artemis mission, but it is highly unlikely that the US would abandon the moon again, given the construction of a permanent base there and that the moon is not in the Middle East. It is likely that either further Artemis missions will be announced and/or contractors like SpaceX and Blue Origin will begin their own regular crewed moon missions to support NASA. Regardless, as Tim says, space is cool as fuck, so you can bet we'll be here to cover this as more humans are sent into the stars. To be entirely honest with everyone, the reason we like working with our sponsor Surfshark VPN is that it's not a particularly hard sell to make. It literally pays for itself. You just have to ask yourself whether being able to completely turn off ads online, protect yourself from phishers, trackers, malware, and email scams, and entirely sidestep region locks is worth a few bucks a month. And we really do mean a few bucks a month. In fact, with how the world is right now, it's probably cheaper where you live to get a whole month of Surfshark than to buy 1 liter of oil. You also need to consider how much time you might save, because in case you didn't know, Surfshark's clean web feature can turn off YouTube ads. Try comparing Surfshark to the cost of YouTube Premium and see what conclusion you come to. And let's all be honest, no one likes region-locked content for YouTube, streaming platforms, or otherwise. But with 4,500 servers to choose from in every corner of the world, region locks become a complete non-issue. We shouldn't even have to mention Surfshark's security features, like the one that can scan your email for signs of deception. Just for a fun comparison, when the channel got hacked in late 2024, it would have been cheaper to pay for Surfshark for the next 300 years than what it cost to undo all the damage. As we said, Surfshark pays for itself. We should also keep in mind that Surfshark is entirely risk-free, because if you back out within the first 30 days, they'll give you a full refund. No questions asked. To make the deal even sweeter, by going to surfshark.com/surswag, using the code SURSWAG, or scanning this QR code. You'll also score yourself an extra 4 months on the house. Surfshark VPN. It's cheaper than the other ones. Meanwhile, Amazon employees work around the body of their dead colleague. The American president takes credit for the Pope landing his job, and the US Defense Secretary quotes a made-up Bible verse written by Quentin Tarantino. We now turn to one of the more notable stories of the month, the election in Hungary. For those unaware, the Balkan nation held federal elections on the 12th of the month. This resulted in a stunning upset victory for the opposition Tajza party and their candidate leader Peter Magyar against current Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Orban has maintained power for roughly 16 years and could be mistaken for the inspiration behind Steve Carell's voice as Gru from Despicable Me.
In Hungary, we introduced a zero-tolerance policy on racism and anti-Semitism, so accusing us is fake news, and those who make these claims are simply idiots.
During his time in power, Hungary has endured economic stagnation and a federal government heavily affected by corruption. According to data from the non-profit organization Transparency International, Hungary ranked 84th out of 182 nations on their Corruption Perceptions Index. Mr. Orban's administration has also been extremely controversial due to laws created to restrict independent media sources, pardoning a suspected child sexual abuser, and harsh attitudes towards migrants and minorities. Despite being one of the least popular politicians in the world, Mr. Orban benefited from widespread voter suppression, as well as the American tactic of gerrymandering. This is when a ruling party redraws voting districts to give their own base more favorable odds in elections, and inversely, dilutes the votes of any opposition party. Seeking to improve his skill in gerrymandering, Viktor Orban summoned Vice President of the United States and couch connoisseur J.D. Vance to help campaign with him as election day draws near. Not able to read the room about general European sentiment towards America, this endorsement from the Oval Office seemed to have the opposite intended effect. And we now come to the election winner and future Prime Minister, Peter Ményár, whom we have just been informed has a last name that quite literally translates to just Hungary. Having established that, we're going to refer to him as Mr. Hungary from now on. Despite being a former member of Prime Minister Orban's cabinet, Mr. Hungary resigned in 2024 following the aforementioned pardon scandal that involved sexual violence towards children. After his resignation, he became the face of the leading opposition in Hungary, and built a broad coalition that helped propel him to victory. It is worth noting that Mr. Ményár has his fair share of controversial political stances and statements, being outspoken in his support of anti-LGBT and migrant legislation during his tenure in the cabinet of Prime Minister Orban. However, Mr. Ményár is not an outright authoritarian granting pardons to pedophiles, which is an improvement to say the least. Beyond the falling out over the pardon scandal, the largest distinction between these two prime ministers is their stance regarding the EU, and to some extent Russia. Viktor Orban was an avid opponent of the European Union, and frequently aligned himself with the other funny guys in Europe such as used car salesman Alexander Lukashenko and the big poot himself, Vladimir Putin. Oftentimes, Hungary would be the sole veto that stopped important legislation from moving forward. By contrast, Mr. Hungary is an outspoken supporter of the European Union, and would like to repair relations with the group to unlock frozen funding. In the immediate days following the election, Mr. Hungary spoke about reforging ties with the rest of Europe, but more specifically, the neighboring Central European countries such as Austria. However, one key similarity is both politicians' stance on Ukraine, with Mr. Hungary wanting to continue Orban's opposition to sending arms and fast-tracking the war-torn country's entry into the EU. This isn't to say Mr. Hungary feels overly friendly towards Russia either, as he has also promised to end dependency on Russian energy by 2035. Though Mr. Hungary is far from perfect, his election was a clear changing of the guard for a nation eager for something different. As the world says goodbye to one of the longest reigning heads of state, we here at the Swag News team are looking forward to seeing what steps this country will take in this new era. On the 30th of March, India's Electronics and Information Technology Ministry published amendments to the Information Technology Act of 2021. This law originally allowed the Information Technology Ministry to regulate content relating to social media users sharing opinions on government or political issues, implementing new rules to hold citizens to the same legal standard as registered news officials. Supporters of the law argued that cracking down on misinformation was vital to national security and would help prevent unintended outside influence on the political landscape of the country. The new amendments expand content moderation authority to India's Ministries of Defense, Home Affairs, Foreign Affairs, and Information and Broadcasting, letting everyone in power experience the joys of being a Discord moderator. As one might imagine, many within the country have voiced their concern and outrage, citing this as a push towards systematic censorship. Jayashree Bajoria, Associate Director at Human Rights Watch, states that the Indian government has repeatedly amended information technology rules since 2021, with each amendment giving authorities increasing control over online content. The government claims that these rules have been aimed at fake news and hate speech, but instead they have been used to target dissent. When viewing the timeline of events, it is easy to see a pattern of behavior that has led to this most recent amendment. Starting in 2021, India's government amended their information technology rules to include digital services and video streaming platforms, while also introducing a requirement around traceability to allow for more swift government enforcement against those that violate violate the law. Later in 2023, the Indian government established their own fact-checking body with new amendments to their information technology rules, effectively undermining the country's independent news media by directly empowering the central government to be the highest authority regarding a code of ethics that applied to all outlets. The next change was made in October 2025, when India's government further amended the rules to allow their agencies to issue content bans on social media restrictions without transparency to the public, or a verifiable warning system letting users know what they did wrong. This would be later expanded upon as recently as February 2026, when the Indian government shortened the response time required for removing posts criticizing the government from a roughly 36-hour window to no more than 3 hours after being identified. The bulk of social media posts that have been targeted for takedown appear to be those that are primarily critiquing, mocking, or satirizing the members of the Bharatiya Janata Party-led government or Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself. In recent times, many of these posts pointed out Modi's coincidental timing visiting Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel just days before drone strikes were launched in Iran, his lack of condemnation towards the war in Iran, and his lack of condemnation regarding the US Navy sinking an Iranian vessel within the Indian Ocean. Content restriction data provided by Meta itself, parent company of Facebook and Instagram, showcased an exponential increase in restricted posts within India beginning around 2023 up until the time of writing. Other sites such as Twitter have had to block thousands of accounts from the region, especially during times of conflict with Pakistan. No one on the team lives in India, so we aren't quite sure if this video or our entire channel are being blocked from being viewed in the country. Normally, news agencies tend to have to comply with laws like this or risk being cut off from potential viewers, which in turn harms revenue. But thanks to our absolute Chad Patreon supporters, we're able to cover stories like this without having to conform to laws like this. And on the off chance that you are in India and are able to see this, we'll keep covering updates like this until either YouTube or India bans us first. In an effort to keep viewers guessing what we're about to do next, we'd like to use Catan to introduce our next story. You know the strategy in Catan around occupying that one tile that is crucial to another player? And even though they might be able to cut you off from the rest of your roads, you know that you've blocked the one section that person really wanted? Well, that's basically what's happening in the Philippines. For viewers unaware, in the South China Sea, there is a region called the Spratly Islands. It's a foundational source of food for almost every nation within the region, including Vietnam, Taiwan, China, and the Philippines. According to the US Energy Information Administration, or EIA, it is also a documented source of untapped oil reserves, with an estimated 12 billion barrels of oil thought to be contained within the region. The EIA also notes that Japan and South Korea are highly dependent on the nearly 3 trillion worth of commerce that passes through the South China Sea. For context, that's nearly the same amount of oil that typically passes through the Strait of Hormuz, making this another region that has an incredible ability to cause harm on your wallet that you probably couldn't point out on a map before now. Having said all of that, there are basically 2 laws in the South China Sea. The first law is governed by international bodies such as the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, or the United Nations. Essentially, everyone has a rough idea of where their borders are, and they share this information with each other. The point is to recognize something called an EEZ, or an exclusive economic zone, which is just international courtroom speak for dibs. Here's how it works. Your country has exclusive rights to the resources up to 200 nautical miles into the water from your shoreline. This is a very clean-cut and sensible rule, which was immediately rendered inadequate by one little loophole. Islands are considered an extension of the shoreline. In what will become important later, back in 2016, The Hague specifically ruled that features in the Spratly Islands are legally just rocks, and are not entitled to EEZs, officially invalidating this loophole for the region. However, long-time viewers of the channel may remember that international governing bodies are just an inconvenience at best and ignored at worst. According to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, there has been extensive documentation of what can only be described as a sort of sweaty fortnight lobby participating in an island arms race. Some countries are actually dredging up sand and mud to create islands in the middle of the ocean which strengthen their claim to the region. For example, it is entirely possible for Vietnam to locate a patch of coastline which extends several miles under only 2 feet of water out into a coastal shelf, drive a Winnebago camper van to the farthest point possible, and then claim that it is a man-made structure on land owned by their country. This would give them an enormous 200 nautical mile circle which was entirely owned by their country, and would not be encroached on by any other nation who recognized the decision. Going back to our earlier point about laws in the South China Sea, if the first law is do what is officially recognized by the international courts and countries, the second law has to be do whatever the fuck China says if the United States is too busy with other bullshit. Please don't hurt us. To that end, China officially recognizes neither the rulings of The Hague nor the laws of other countries in the region. By claiming the legendary "we don't give a shit" legal defense, China points to a 9-dash line for where it draws its border, which was created by the former Republic of China. Back then, the line originally contained 11 dashes and indicated a full claim by the Chinese government on all resources in the South China Sea. Later, 2 lines were removed as a show of goodwill towards Vietnam, which still leaves 80% of the region under Chinese claim. This has caused what can only be described as a "you and what army" situation, where China is clearly committing a violation of international law, but no one big enough cares enough about it, and everyone has to learn how to live with the new reality of the situation. This leads us to the situation in 1999. According to historical briefs by the US Naval Institute, regional conflicts between China and the Philippines prompted then-President Joseph Estrada to make one of the biggest troll plays of all time. In case you weren't a Pacific naval war expert, the Philippine Navy was, and still is, composed mostly of aging vessels such as the BRP Sierra Madre, a US World War II ship that is literally older than China's claim to the region. Up against superior, well, everything, President Estrada had the Sierra Madre run intentionally aground in the middle of the ocean. Once this was done, the ship was fully retrofitted to be a stationary military base to help resupply other boats in the regional conflict and act as a highly visible landmark, which proves Philippine ownership over the region. There are, as one might imagine, a few problems which arise from beaching a ship in the middle of the ocean. For one, you can't just hop in the car and drive down to the local 7-Eleven to buy a sandwich if you ran out of food. Supplies have to be delivered by boat, and in times of extreme tension, even airdropped to the crew in order to feed them. The commute is also a factor, with the trip taking multiple days on slow-moving civilian transport vessels so as to not attract the attention of the ever-present Chinese blockade of the area. The soldiers stationed here can live on the ship for months at a time, typically taking advantage of the bountiful waters they're stranded in by fishing for food. Now that we've established historical context, we can discuss what happened this month. While most of the world has been focused on Iran, the Philippines have begun accusing China of dumping cyanide in the waters around the Sierra Madre. A Philippine Navy spokesperson said troops had seized 10 bottles of cyanide from fishing boats back in 2025, and just last month allegedly caught another crew actively poisoning the waters near the shoal. These accusations of Minecraft griefing are actually just the latest in a long series of incidents involving China and the Philippines. Previously, China has been accused of blinding civilians using high-powered military-grade lasers mounted on top their ships and employing the use of audio cannons to disrupt sailors' equilibriums and operations around the base. Toxic levels of cyanide in the waters are anticipated to cause irreparable harm to the natural systems which exist on the coral reefs in the region. And, considering the fish are a major source of food for the ship crew themselves, this could also be seen as a starvation tactic. While dumping cyanide in the ocean might be totally permissible under the whatever the fuck China says law, it is in fact a major violation of international and maritime law. This latest incident has followed a pattern that has been occurring over the course of 2025, with multiple bottles seized by the Philippine Navy testing positive for cyanide in a recent lab report. That report was published this month. on April 13th. If these claims can be validated by other countries, it may actually signal a change in the international community's attitude towards the conflict which they have largely ignored up until this point. While China may be given an obscene amount of leeway when it comes to which sovereign claims to land it wishes to acknowledge, there is much less forgiveness in the eyes of the international courts when it comes to the destruction of vital resources. The European Union has already been paying more attention to the region and has been condemning China's action in the region for months. With the Strait of Hormuz already threatening to keep international shipping and global oil supplies in a stranglehold, any conflict breaking out over another economic choke point no one could point to on a map is something that the international community will most likely work to avoid. As such, only time will tell how much this recent escalation will change the future of control over the region. Hungary isn't the only nation turning a new page with elections, as the country of Peru has also held elections for its highest office this month as well. Longtime viewers of the channel may remember that Peru has had a few controversial presidents over the past few decades, due to instability and widespread corruption. For those unfamiliar with the game of Peruvian presidents, since 2001, Peru's presidents have been arrested for bribery, committed suicide to avoid being arrested for bribery, arrested for money laundering, removed from office for taking bribes, arrested for inciting a rebellion, and finally, removed from office after being accused of taking bribes. Back in November, we covered Dina Boluarte's removal from office in addition to concerns regarding interim president Jose Hiri. Since our last spotlight on the ongoing conflict, Jose Hiri has been removed from office and Peru is hosting yet another presidential election. The first round of the presidential elections were held from April 12th to 13th between 34 candidates. While 3 clear frontrunners emerged from the crowded race, the election results are still being tallied at the time of writing, and are not expected to be finalized until sometime around mid-May. With this in mind, here's a detailed breakdown of those 3 candidates who are most likely to take the presidency come June or July of this year. Leading with 17% of the popular vote is Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of former president Alberto Fujimori. Keiko Fujimori is the leading member for the conservative Fuerza Popular Party, and has represented the District of Lima in Congress from 2006 to 11 before unsuccessfully running for president in 2011, 2016, and 2021. While not included in that previous highlight reel of Peruvian corruption, President Alberto Fujimori was yet another Peruvian president to be convicted, with his charges being related to bribery, illegal wiretapping, and crimes against humanity. He is, funnily enough though, also remembered equally for reducing inflation, growing the economy, and expanding social programs. Keiko Fujimori intends to build upon that positive aspect of her father's memory by allocating funds to assist children and the elderly, deploy the military to combat violent organized crime, and overhaul Peru's prison system to better serve the country, such as requiring prison inmates to be convicted of serious offenses to be put to work. The Fuerza Party holds the largest bloc in Congress, with Fujimori gaining strong support from those who benefited from the social programs she intends to strengthen. Running up in second place at the time of writing, with 12% of the popular vote, is Roberto Sanchez, representing the leftist Juntos por el Perú party. Roberto Sanchez's political work history includes working as Peru's trade and tourism minister from 2021 to 2022, being the leading Congress member for his party since 2021, and operating as the president of a congressional commission monitoring the Chancay megaport. Roberto Sanchez aims to bring landmark economic changes to Peru, starting with drafting a new constitution and expanding government spending. Under his leadership, the tax systems would face extensive reforms. Peru's natural resources would be partially nationalized, and healthcare and education institutions would be given an increased amount of government spending alongside making higher education free. If that wasn't enough, he also has promised to make deep reforms to both law enforcement agencies and the justice system, and push for new industrialization efforts by developing a Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Roberto Sanchez has strong support from the rural south and eastern regions of Peru, as well as areas with large indigenous populations who prioritize social change the most. Running up in a close third place as of time of writing, with less than 12% of the popular vote, is Rafael Lopez Aliaga, of the right populist Renovación Popular Party. Aliaga has served as a railway and luxury hotel hotel businessman, operated as a member of the conservative Catholic organization Opus Dei, and held the position of mayor within Lima from 2023 to 25. Rafael Lopez Aliaga previously ran for president back in 2021, coming in third during the runoff, similarly to how he has performed in this runoff election thus far. Aliaga has pledged to crack down hard on violent crime by developing the national military and possibly working with the United States military to confront street crime in addition to shuttering most government ministries, employing military courts for civilian prosecution, and developing national troops for border control. Backed by wealthy and religious leadership within Peru, Aliaga's views stand firm against abortion, gay marriage, and other cultural issues from what he labels as lying, thieving, and murderous progressives. Lima makes up a third of Peru's entire population, and they are more than willing to support their previous mayor in his presidential run. For a country that has spent 20 years playing corruption whack-a-mole, we hope that whoever ends up running the place next is better than the last 7 or so presidents put together. The world will be able to find out who the next president of Peru will be once the runoff elections take place on the 7th of June. And we'll be right there to cover the story as it develops. We now turn to the story no one on the team wanted to touch with the 10-foot pole: the war in Iran. After intensely monitoring the situation over the past month, we've come to the very scientific conclusion that this war is too goddamn big. There is too much history, too many headlines, too many contradictions, and too many LEGO AI propaganda videos. It is so big, in fact, that trying to cover every single development would be utterly pointless. Because in a conflict like this, the news is often out of date by the time it hits your screen. So instead of trying to write 6 seasons and a movie worth of background and coverage, we're going to give a status update on the war, the ceasefire, domestic and international sentiment, economic impacts, and whatever the fuck is going on in Lebanon. Everything written here is being written as of the 24th, so if this shit seems off, blame our deadlines. To give a brief pulse check, there's still kind of a war going on, but no side wants to admit that. Since the beginning of the conflict, more than 3,000 people have been killed in Iran according to state-run media sources. The US-based rights group HRANA puts that estimate closer to 3,600, with 1,700 of the dead being identified as civilians and 250 being children. In Lebanon, at least 1,800 people have been killed since fighting started in March, with roughly 300 dying during some of the heaviest bombardment on April 8th, according to Lebanese officials. At this time, it is unclear if that number also includes the roughly 400 Hezbollah fighters that the group has confirmed dead since the start of the conflict. Outside of the initial deaths in the conflict, the United States and Israel have lost less than 50 people since this all started. To kick off the month, there was heightened tension as Iran shot down a US Air Force F-15E fighter jet, carrying 2 members, marking the first time a US combat aircraft was shot down during the war. Both crew members were able to eject safely, and while one of the crew members was recovered on the day of the crash, the US had difficulties locating the second airman. This culminated in a successful search and rescue operation that lasted 2 days and took commandos deep inside Iran territory to rescue the pilot. Following this up, love him or hate him, no one makes announcements quite like US President Donald Trump. With citizens of the United States paying 30% more for gas in the span of a month and generally not being happy about it, Trump decided that the strait needed to be reopened as soon as possible. To do this, Trump put out one of the greatest crash-outs of all time in his efforts to shitpost his way into opening the strait. In this post, Trump tried to carefully reason with Iran by referring to Iranians as crazy bastards, telling them that they'll be living in hell and declaring praise be to Allah, all on Easter Sunday morning. With everyone still reacting to Trump spiraling out after losing the annual Easter egg hunt, Trump unilaterally decided a few days later that Iran will agree to reopen the strait and accept a deal by the 7th of April. If the strait was not reopened by then, he declared that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Naturally, this sent diplomats, financial institutions, and just about anyone really, into full panic mode, wondering if the world was about to get a brand new Fallout game a lot sooner than expected. Thankfully, before the deadline ran out, negotiations resumed, largely through Pakistani mediation, and a 2-week ceasefire was announced by both sides. Not quite getting the memo though, Israel launched its heaviest bombardment of Lebanon the day after, with over 100 airstrikes in the span of 10 minutes. When asked by pretty much everyone in the international community what the fuck they were doing, Israel confidently said that the US and Iran ceasefire had nothing to do with them and Lebanon. With this particular incident flavoring the start of the new negotiations, one can imagine they were about as useful as a bronze Hanzo main. On the American side, Freedom Land wanted a full reopening of Hormuz, the end of nuclear enrichment, the handover of nuclear stockpiles, long-term nuclear monitoring programs, and an end to Iranian support for regional proxy groups. Tehran, not quite feeling the Christmas spirit in April, rejected all the points of the US wish list and countered with demands for monetary compensation. Tolling rights through the Strait, US non-aggression guarantees, recognition of its right to enrich uranium, and the ability to continue to support its proxy allies. So technically, yes, both sides were talking to each other, even if they weren't really listening. Seeing the brick wall across the table and realizing they were getting nowhere fast, the US delegation left the talks, and also made sure that Israel and Hezbollah came to a 10-day ceasefire agreement. As of time of writing, this agreement has been extended another 3 weeks. On the 17th of April, Iran and the United States announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open to commercial vessels following the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire agreement. However, this immediately fell apart after Iran reclosed the waterway not even 24 hours later, and 2 vessels were hit with mines. This meant that the US blockade went into effect, with Freedom Land turning around almost 30 ships and firing upon an Iranian cargo ship trying to get around the blockade. What makes this all the more confusing is that not long after this, Trump announced that the ceasefire would be extended indefinitely, and was sending his son-in-law Jared Kushner back over to Pakistan to resume negotiations. In addition to all of this, the Trump administration has levied brand new sanctions on Iran's oil industry and independent Chinese refinery, hoping to slow more parts of the country's economy and one of its biggest buyers. So, what the fuck does any of this mean to those that aren't terminally online, living in this region of the world, or just have the misfortune of covering this shitstorm? Well, the economy is kinda all over the place, with price shocks in pretty much every sector as global supply chains start to feel the squeeze, and stock markets literally climbing higher than they ever have. Jet fuel supplies have tightened enough that airlines are warning about higher costs, possible fuel shortages, and even cancelling flights due to the impacts of the oil shortage. On the topic of oil, viewers might be shocked to learn that attacking energy infrastructure is one hell of a way to make a dent in everyone's economy. Iranian attacks on Ras Taruna in Saudi Arabia and Ras Laffan in Qatar, some of the most important energy export terminals in the world, have cost the countries more than a combined $50 billion worth of oil output, with repairs potentially taking years. As the entire world collectively groans from the cost of everything rising, the international community has been paying attention to the conflict so far, with Britain and Spain in particular catching strays from Cheeseburger Land. After initially refusing to let the US use air bases for their bombing campaigns and directly help out in the conflict, the Pentagon began circling a memo talking about revoking support backing Britain's claim of sovereignty over the Falkland Islands. If you've never paid attention to the fucking islands, essentially, the UK and Argentina both have claims to the land for various reasons that we aren't going to cover right now. Not wanting to leave Spain out of the fun for similar actions, in addition to closing off their airspace entirely, the United States talked about the possibility of suspending the country from NATO. This is highly unlikely though, as the founding document of the alliance explicitly prohibits suspending a member country. Russia, meanwhile, has treated this conflict like a generational business opportunity. A Ukrainian intelligence assessment claimed that Russian satellites have helped coordinate Iranian strikes, and Russian tech support also helped Iran-aligned hacker groups target vulnerable infrastructure. In addition to all of that, the longer the war goes on, the more likely energy prices rise. With higher energy prices, Russia would be able to sell its own oil supplies at a greater rate for a nice economic boost, especially as President Trump has lifted some of the sanctions on Russian oil sales back in March. Sensing that momentum may be shifting slightly, Ukraine has started to get involved in the conflict, offering its own supply of drones to help Gulf countries and keep oil prices low. Although the state of the conflict is unclear at this moment, everything could literally change within the hour. The United States in particular is developing a bit of a reputation of doing random bullshit as we're putting the final touches on our coverage for the month. So this entire situation might be over by now. On the off chance the entire world ended all hostilities between the time of writing and the time this video comes out, we'll have to find something else to cover next month to take up half the runtime of our video. However, However, in the very likely scenario that nothing gets resolved before Swag comes back from vacation, we're sure viewers will be more than happy to watch Swag suffer while writing about his favorite region of the world again. The news might be over, but on a personal note, Swag's surgery went well, so he'll be back in the saddle for next month's episode. If our quality mysteriously spiked this month, just know it was because he wasn't there trying to cram the script with Titanfall references. With this said, the fact that the show could go on even while Swag was doped up on pain medication says a lot about the dedication of our Patreon supporters, who make it all possible. With ad revenue perpetually fucked, and sponsors being less consistent than US foreign policy, this house of cards is built upon people like yourselves who continue to fund us month after month. As always, a link to support us will be down below. But until next time, we'd like to wish everyone a very happy May.
The whole world's on fire. A private jet flies to Bel Air. All our food expired, but we'll feed the billionaires. They'll eat you till you're bare.